Hey friends, welcome back. Today we're going to be chatting about all of the fall book recommendations I have for you, but prompted by very specific feelings, thoughts, ideas, situations that all happen to be fall, autumnal, spooky season, all those things. Let's get into it because I'm really excited and proud of this whole list. If you've never seen an oddly specific book recommendation video before, I think you'll catch on pretty quickly. The first one that I'm doing is a book that feels like or reminds you of falling and crunchy leaves. I don't know about you, but a crunchy leaf walk is one of my favorite things ever about fall. And I have two really solid book recs for you. The first one is The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. This is a new obsession of mine. I think it will definitely go on my most surprising or even in my top 10 of the year. This book is very reminiscent of the Chronicles of Narnia. Two young boys go missing in this forest. Then years and years later after that, the boys are grown up. One of them doesn't remember anything and the other one actually goes into solving missing persons cases and is now tasked with finding someone's younger sister that has gone missing. It brings them back full circle to the woods where they went missing, and they have to sort of remember and come to terms with everything that happened to them while being very fantasy forward. This book is so classic fairy tale. It literally opens with Once Upon a Time. The writing is absolutely stunning. There is a storyteller corner where there's little excerpts of the person who's telling this story, sort of butting in and giving you little, I don't know, whimsical inserts. It's just so much fun. I just loved it so much. Definitely a 5 out of 5, and I just need more people to read it. I related this one to Crunching Falling Leaves because a good chunk of this takes place in the woods, and just the overall emotion of stepping on a good crunchy leaf, it makes me so happy. This book makes me so happy. So it makes sense to me. Then my other book rec is going to be Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. Man, I think it was in 2022 that this was on my best books of the year, and it still stands up. I think about this book every single day. And I think that's why I also connected this book with the crunchy leaf or falling leaf prompt, because this does, I think, take place, at least in cooler weather. There is a apple orchard involved, and that involves leaves. This one has two main characters, Emery and August. When they were in high school, August was actually accused of murdering her best friend Lily, and that prompted August and his mother to sort of move away. Either that or August moves away alone. Regardless, 14 years later, August is returning to bury his mother's ashes, and Emery must confront her first love and the reason he left so abruptly. But the town wants August gone again. And as the island begins to show signs of strange happenings, the emergence of deep betrayals and hidden promises threatens to reveal the truth behind Lily's death once and for all. I'm telling you, this is small town drama on a magical island, and it's just so good. It's like a fantasy mystery thriller, honestly, is kind of how I feel about it. But I love it. I love both of these books, so please read them. Thanks. The next prompt is a book that feels like holding a warm, cozy drink on a cold day. If you haven't heard of this book already, I don't know how you haven't. If you've not already read it, I don't know how you haven't. But I'm gonna recommend it to you because I recently read it and had a lot of fun. It is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This is just a cute little cozy romance book. It's our main character who gets gifted this Pumpkin Spice Cafe from her aunt. And she moves away from her big city life, her stressful job, to move to this very small town and run this cafe. She's having some trouble kind of joining in the community and is just nervous about the whole thing. There's someone kind of trying to sabotage her cafe and settling in general. And of course there's a love interest. Of course it does get a little bit steamy, which I wasn't expecting for whatever reason. I picked up this book with not really knowing anything about it, but it is a romance. It is a little bit spicy. And if you go in for a good time, you should have a good time because I thought it was really cute. I think that the atmosphere was written really well and it's just cozy. It's holding a warm drink on a cold day, particularly a pumpkin spice drink on a cold day. Am I right? Next, the other one I'm going to say is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Madonna. This book, I put it off for so long. The year that it came out, I just couldn't get around how long the title was. This book takes place in a world where magic isn't really known, and Mika Moon is one of the few witches in Britain. There is a little coven that meet up every so often and sort of I don't know, have a meeting about what's been going on in the magical world and if anyone needs to express any concerns that they have and things like that. But Mika has an Instagram account or an online account where she pretends, but she's actually doing magic. But it's her way of expressing who she is with making it seem a little bit silly. but someone in this world finds her account and like knows that she's a real witch. And it's this little found family in this house in the middle of nowhere where it's like these 3 older people and they have these 3 young girls. 3 young girls? I think it's just 2 actually, who are witches. And they need someone who knows magic and can help these young girls sort of like control their magic, because when you're a kid, you're very volatile, your emotions are all over the place, and like that, while being magical and having these powers, like it's kind of a mess. One of the caretakers is a very grumpy librarian, and he's the love interest, very much a grumpy sunshine sort of trope. And this is just another insanely wholesome story. I loved all of the conversation about our main character and how finding places where she fits in and can be herself is very difficult in more ways than just being a witch. And it just really made Sangu Madonna an auto-buy author for me. So I definitely recommend this book. It feels like a cozy drink on a cold day. The next prompt is one of my favorites. It is The Season of the Witch. And of course, I have some witchy books for you. One that I most recently read is Slewfoot by Brom. This was in one of my most recent reading vlogs where Kayla and I went to the pumpkin patch. We did a lot of fall activities and I read Slewfoot. This is just as good as everyone says it is. This is one of those that, for whatever reason, I was putting off. Maybe it was just the weird shape of the book. This is very much like witchy folk horror, and it opens up pretty eerie. Like there is eerie parts throughout the entire book, especially when these creatures and the folklore elements are involved. Like it is a little bit spooky, but at its core, it is sort of like definitely folk horror, but like a good for her story. Our main character is Abatha, and she gets married off to this man who lives in this Puritan community, and she's very outspoken. She doesn't really like adhere to rules very well, where in this community, women can't really speak on any big changes, especially business matters. And it says it in the synopsis, so I'm not spoiling anything, but her husband dies, so she actually is a widow now and is trying to take care of their farmland. But there are people within the small community that are out to get her. Little do they know is that she is a cunning woman and she has friends in low places. It is a tale of bewitchery, and it is really, really solid. Definitely a Season of the Witch. And of course, it wouldn't be a fall recommendation video if I didn't talk about The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I've been recommending this book since I read it. It is perfect to read while the colors are changing, while the leaves, everything's dying. Like, it's just beautiful. This is about 3 estranged sisters who reconnect somehow in Salem. It's set in 1893, and there's no such thing as witches. There used to be in the wild, dark days before the burnings began, but now witching is nothing but tidy charms and nursery rhymes. If the modern woman wants any measure of power, she must find it in the ballot box. But our 3 main characters are the Eastwood sisters, James Juniper, Agnes Amaranth, and Beatrice Belladonna. They join the suffragists in New Salem, and they begin to pursue the forgotten words and ways that might turn the women's movement into the witches' movement. Man, hearing their names again is so fun. I love this book. Stalked by shadows and sickness, hunted by forces that will not suffer a witch to vote, and perhaps not even to live, the sisters will need to delve into their oldest magics, draw new alliances, and heal the bond between them if they want to survive. The quote is always my favorite. It says, "I am terrified and I am terrible. I am fearful and I am something to be feared." Just 5 out of 5. I adore this writing. I adore the book. I love the story. Always recommend it every year. Then this one I'm going to not really talk about very much. The Unmothers by Leslie J. Anderson definitely is still like a Season of the Witch sort of vibe, but I'm not gonna tell you how or why because it's one that you sort of have to read and experience. But this one is another small town. A lot of small towns. I love a small town. But another small town, like rural community. There's a claim that a healthy young baby boy was born from a horse, and this main character Marshall, who is a recent grieving widow, is a journalist, and she is sent to sort of investigate this claim. And she gets sort of thrown into the deep end with all of these characters and all of these just really interesting situations. It says, "It is unbearably tense and utterly gripping. This atmospheric tale of female rage, bodily autonomy, and generational trauma hails the arrival of a masterful new storyteller." And I am inclined to agree. I feel like this writing was so solid. This will also be on my most surprising of the year because I didn't know what to expect, and it was phenomenal. The next prompt is picking out a costume. This first book in the costume sense would be Not Everything Is As It Seems, and it is Bloom by Delia S. Dawson. This is a short little book that packs a punch. It is one of the most wild books that I've read in a very long time. It has lived in my head rent-free since I've read it. Plot twist at the end we're not expecting. It is so like sweet and calm in the beginning of the story, and by the end it is just an absolute 180. You need to read it. Our main character, whose name is Rosemary, meets this girl named Ash at this farmer's market. Ash has a stall where she sells cupcakes, soaps, flowers, and Rosemary becomes like very obsessed with her. And it seems like it's sort of reciprocated as well. And it is just a tale about that. And their like growing obsession with one another, but like in a very like all-consuming, intense way. Ash is a very strange person, and Rosemary slowly starts to understand that. And it's one that you really just have to experience. Again, you need to read it. Then I have 3 other books that I want to lump together for the rest of this prompt, because sometimes when you're choosing a costume, it is maybe like a ghost's costume and it's a little bit obscuring for the vision, or maybe you're trying to be a little bit mysterious. These 3 books sort of fit that vibe where you don't really know what's going on. But it is a spooky, very atmospheric, eerie time. I would say anything by Mona Awad, but these 2 in particular, obviously Bunny. Again, I will recommend this every year, all year round. This is always gonna be one of my favorite books. Likewise, with All's Well by Mona Awad, this one is literally like about theater students, where there are actual costumes, so it does sort of work. But Mona Awad has this way of writing where you really just have to be along for the ride. You have to just sort of let the story wash over you and experience it, because there really isn't anyone that writes atmospheric horror like she does, in my opinion. I think that the trajectory of the plots are always so wild and obscure, but written in a way that is so compelling. And if you like sort of like an unhinged, what the hell did I just read time? Yeah, I would check out Mona Awad for sure. In the same exact vein, where this is a psychological horror and it is a little bit more of an emotional psychological horror, but Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. It's a very short book and it packs a punch. Towards like the middle to the end of the book, I still couldn't really tell you exactly what happened. Well, I could explain it, but like I wouldn't understand it. It's about a married couple. It's Leah and Mary, and Leah is a marine biologist and she gets sent down in the submarine, and the expedition is very casual. Like it's something they've done a million times, but this time they don't resurface. And Mary, above water, is just thinking that Leah's gone forever. But eventually, much, much later, the submarine does unsubmerge? Surface. It does surface again, but the Leah that went down into the submarine is not the Leah that has come out. And this is a dual point of view where we're following Leah down in the submarine, which is terrifying in the concept of it, and also the aftermath from Mary's point of view of like grappling with how she's no longer who she was when she left. And it's been very difficult for both of them to sort of go on. It's a really solid book and I definitely recommend it. This one definitely messes with your senses, sort of like obscuring your vision or understanding, which is sort of why I think it fits with the costume prompt. But mostly I'm also always looking for situations where I can push my agenda of my favorite books. This prompt is literally just your favorite cozy baking recipe, because fall, cooler weather is the perfect time for baking, and that's why you need to read The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. I think that this book is such a fun little cozy fantasy, rivaling Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree for me. If you like one, I would say that you should like the other. This one has our 2 main characters, Kayla and Kaz. Kaz is a sentient snake plant, and Kayla is a librarian on the mainland, but in the beginning of the book, the library, like the whole town, is on fire. The revolution in the city has set it ablaze, and they are sort of like taking all the library books they can carry and escaping the mainland and going to this island. Kayla was actually born on this island, but when she was a little bit older, her parents actually brought her to the mainland, but she's been here before. The people that she is in contact with, once they get to the island, they remember her parents. It's another sort of small town vibe. And eventually Kayla recognizes that within the market of this small island, it's missing something to pair well with the bakery items. And she finds out that it's jam. And so she uses some illegal magic to start her jam business, while also selling some remedies, which are definitely spells, for all of the townspeople and their crops and their trees that are dying. And of course there is a brawny, nosy neighbor who is continuously checking up on Kayla, making sure that she's good, making sure if she needs anything. And I just think Kayla is such a relatable main character. I loved reading from her perspective. I laughed quite a few times. The audiobook is phenomenal, and it is just a cozy, fun time. Read it. Okay, this next one, the prompt is candy corn, because when Caleb was helping me think of a couple of these, he's like, candy corn. It's a good one for like, you either love it or you hate it. And he's so right. I am choosing Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. This is the author that wrote Last House on Needless Street. I think that this book by her is widely loved. I think most people really appreciate this book for what it is and for what it's worth. This is one of my favorite books ever. If you haven't read this, you should. But for the candy corn prompt, I am gonna go with Looking Glass Sound, because I feel like this one is a little bit like heady and meta in a way that not everyone might enjoy, but for the right audience, like me, I think that it is a really solid book. Kaitlyn Ward is another author where you can't talk about the books too much when pitching them, because I think what makes her books so interesting and so exciting are all of the plot twists at the very end. Like, you really don't understand what's happening until you have finished the book. The synopsis for Looking Glass Sound is just so dramatic. In a cottage overlooking the windswept Maine coast, Wilder Harlow has begun the last book he will ever write. It is a story about the sun-drenched summer days of his youth in Whistler Bay and the sun-stained path of the killer that stalked his small vacation town. About the terrible secret he and his companions Nat and Harper discovered entombed in the coves of the bay, and how the pact that they swore that day echoed down the decades, forever shaping their lives. But the more Wilder writes, the less he trusts himself and his memory. He starts to see things that can't be real. Notes hidden in the cabin from an old friend, now dead, a woman with dark hair drowning in the icy waters below, calling for help, entire chapters he doesn't recall typing, appearing overnight. Who or what is haunting Wilder? No longer able to trust his own eyes, Wilder begins to fear that this will not only be his last book, but the last thing he ever does. It's so dramatic, and I am just remembering everything that happened in the book, and yeah, I love it. But the way that it's written and just Kaitlyn Ward's writing style, I think isn't for everybody. But if it sounds interesting and we have sort of similar reading tastes, like, I'd try it. The next one, very classic, fall sort of vibe, Dark Academia. Okay, the prompt is a book that feels like clearing the dust off an old tome and watching the motes dance in the light. Very dramatic, but you know, that's how I feel when I think about these books in particular. If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. One of my favorite, like, Dark Academia sort of style books. It follows 7 young Shakespearean actors at the Delacour Classic Conservatory. The beginning of the synopsis is my favorite. It says, "Enter the players. There were 7 of us then. 7 bright young things with wide, precious futures ahead of us. Until that year, we saw no further than the books in front of our faces. On the day Oliver Marks is released from jail, the man who put him there is waiting at the door. Detective Colburn wants to know the truth, and after 10 years, Oliver is ready to tell it." A decade ago, the 7 young Shakespearean actors at the Delacour Classic Conservatory, it is a place of keen ambition and fierce competition. In this secluded world of firelight and leather-bound books, Oliver and his friends play the same roles on stage as off. Hero, villain, tyrant, temptress, ingenue, I can never say the word, forgive me, and extra. But in their 4th and final year, good-natured rivalries turn ugly, and on opening night, real violence invades the students' world of make-believe. In the morning, the 4th years find themselves facing their very own tragedy and their greatest acting challenge yet, convincing the police and each other and themselves that they are innocent. It's like a slow burn, pretentious mystery thriller, because, like, these are Shakespearean students. Like, they go in and out of Shakespeare quotes in their normal, like, day-to-day speaking. Like, it is very pretentious, and I just love it so much. I also just love Emma Rio's writing style and the way that she constructs her plot. By the end of the book, like, I was like, oh, it's pretty good. Like, it's probably a 4 stars. And then the last 50 pages happened, and now it's one of my favorite books ever. Same exact thing with The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, another one that I will just always recommend. One of the few books that I've actually reread in my life, and it's the way that this synopsis, like, always makes me want to cry. In the beginning of the book, Zachary Rollins is our main character, and he finds this book in his university library that basically sends him on this quest, because what's inside the book is a depiction of his entire life. Determined to solve the puzzle of the book, Zachary follows the clues he finds in the cover: a bee, a key, and a sword. They guide him to a masquerade ball, to a dangerous secret club, and finally through a magical doorway created by the fierce and mysterious Mirabelle. This door leads to a subterranean labyrinth filled with stories hidden far beneath the surface of the earth. When the labyrinth is threatened, Zachary must race with Mirabelle and Daryan, a handsome barefoot man with shifting alliances, through its twisting tunnels and crowded ballrooms, searching for the end of his story. You are invited to join Zachary on the Starless Sea, the home of storytellers, story lovers, and those who will protect our stories at all costs. It has it all: mystery, intrigue, magical doors, an underground labyrinth library, sort of like secret societies. The storyline is one that I think, like, people argue about forever. Like, on the internet, there are so many theories and little threads on Reddit that, like, people are still trying to piece together what is actually going on. It's very much like every single thing is a puzzle piece. Every little thing matters, and it gets a little fever dreamy sometimes. Like, it's literally like my perfect book. It's so good. It just reminds me of fall. The other Dark Academia is a little bit more of like a I was gonna say violent one, but it is true. Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. This one is following Siona, who is basically the first woman to ever be admitted into the High Magistry. Even when she gets admitted into it, her challenges have only just begun. You know, it's a very like male dominated industry. She is just facing all of this discrimination just for being a woman. Every single person that she is involved with is just making her life a living hell, basically making everything very difficult. And one of these things that her coworkers are doing to her is giving her a janitor as her lab assistant. But they didn't know that this janitor, before he mopped the floors for the mages, Tomil was a nomadic hunter from beyond the city, Tyrion's magical border. 10 years have passed since he survived the perilous crossing that killed his family, but working for a high mage, he sees the opportunity to finally understand the forces that decimated his tribe, drove him from his homeland, and keep the Tyranish in power. Through their fractious relationship, mage and outsider uncover an ancient secret that could change the course of magic forever, if it doesn't get them killed first. And through their research together, they find some really dark things that have been going on within the city, and they have to come to terms with, if they continue their research, they could disrupt literally everything in the world that they know, but then know the truth, or brush it under the rug and just go back to researching something else. And I bet you know which one they choose. It is a little bit of a harder read sometimes, but I do think it's done really, really well, and definitely has that like magical dark academia vibe. This next prompt is very mean because it makes me sweat a little bit. It is, there are only 9 weeks left in the year. That's the prompt, which is terrifying because time is always running out. Right? And that's why these books that I'm recommending to you have to do with, you know, the horror of time. We Spread by Ian Reid is for sure a book that you should read. This is following our main character. I think her name is Penny. Yes. Oh, Penny. She is an artist and she has lived in the same apartment for decades with her lifelong partner. But her lifelong partner has passed away, and little does Penny know that he had put plans into motion that once Penny was no longer able to care for herself, she had a place at this like long-term care facility, and it was all like already squared away, or so the book says. I'll tell you in a second. But basically, she falls at home and she is then taken to this care facility. Initially, surrounded by her peers, conversing, eating, sleeping, and looking out at the beautiful woods around the house, all is well. She even begins to paint again. But as the days start to blur together, Penny, with a growing sense of unrest and distrust, starts to lose grip on the passage of time and on her place in the world. Is she succumbing to the subtly destructive effects of aging, or is she an unknowing participant in something more unsettling? And it is just so anxiety-inducing and so unsettling because our main character is a very elderly woman. We don't know if we can trust anything that she is saying or her perception of the people around her. And I think about this book all the time because aging and time and memory are such terrifying concepts, and Ian Reid does this in such a way that is masterful. It is so scary and so good. Another book for this like time, you know, death sort of prompt is a nonfiction. It is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Kaitlyn Doty. This is one of the first books that I really read getting back into reading, and you can tell by how I did the tabs. It's crazy. But this is basically like a memoir sort of style book about Kaitlyn Doty and her journey of becoming a mortician, as well as like the history of undertaking. And it says it'll make you reconsider how our culture treats the dead. That's one of the things that I remember loving so much about this book, is that I learned a lot. I remember laughing a lot as well because Kaitlyn Doty's writing is kind of unserious. Her research that went into this book is just really solid. And as someone who, obviously just from what I said about We Spread as well, like the thought of dying obviously is a little bit scary, a lot of it. And I think that this was a really great book for me to read. And I think it's one that I should reread because it's funny, it's educational, it is told in such a phenomenal way. If you are ever looking for a nonfiction book, this one's a really good one. Okay, 2 more. And this prompt is debatably my favorite one. The prompt is having a scary movie on at a house party. Because if you've ever been in that situation, you know that the volume is either really, really low or there's no volume at all, and it's literally just on the screen for the atmosphere and the vibes while everyone else is just doing their thing. And I just love this because these are books that if you're paying attention and like really sitting and stewing with the atmosphere and you like a slow burn sort of thing, I think that you'd really like it. Because The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay is not one that I really like always recommend to people because I know that a lot of people don't like it. This one could be the candy corn prompt as well. You'll either love it or you hate it. But this one is such a subtle, slow burn sort of eerie horror that I just ate up. Our main character is Art Barbara, and he needs like an extracurricular to buff up his college application. So he starts a club called the Pallbearers Club where they go to funerals that don't have a lot of attendees, and they literally are pallbearers for these deceased people. And one of the attendees brought along her Polaroid camera to take pictures of the corpses. And it says, okay, that part was a little weird. So was her obsessive knowledge of a notorious bit of New England folklore that involved digging up the dead. And there were other strange things, terrifying things that happened when she was around, usually at night, but she was his friend, so it was okay, right? Decades later, Art tries to make sense of it all by writing The Pallbearers Club, a memoir. But somehow his friend got her hands on the manuscript and, well, she has some issues with it, and now she's making cuts. Seamlessly blurring the lines between fiction and memory, the supernatural and the mundane, Pallbearers Club is an immersive, suspenseful portrait of an unusual and disconcerting relationship. And it really is. The reading experience is very fun because while you're reading, you'll see a red pen that is like crossing things out and giving little annotations throughout the entire book. And at the end of most chapters, there is like her talking to Art about like how wrong he is or her view on what actually happened. And it is so interesting. I remember the audiobook being really immersive. And again, it is a slow burn, sort of like brings mundane things into the storyline. And I just had such a good time. It is, again, not a mystery thriller. It is slow burn and eerie, okay? It's important to manage your expectations with this. I'd say likewise with Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. 2 M.L. Rios, I didn't even realize I did that. Well, whatever, because I just recently read this and it is really a short novella, very fun. First 50 pages, I wasn't really sure if I was gonna like it, but then just like in If We Were Villains, by the last 50 pages, I was just obsessed with it. The synopsis is very quick. It is every night in the college's ancient cemetery, 5 people cross paths as they work the late shift. A bartender, a rideshare driver, a hotel receptionist, the unofficial steward of the derelict church that looms over them, and the editor-in-chief of the college paper, always in search of a story. One dark October evening in the defunct churchyard, they find a hole that wasn't there before, a fresh open grave where no grave should be. But who dug it and for whom? In the author note in the very beginning, it says, insomnia unravels a person without mercy. The mystery at the heart of the Graveyard Shift is as much about what keeps us up at night as it is about what is buried in the cemetery. And it's great. Another sort of like subtly eerie, slow burn, and open-ended in a way that I really loved. The last prompt is another one that Caleb helped out with because it is very true for many of us still, where we're having to sort of just pretend that it's autumn if it's still like not cold. So the prompt is, it's October 27th, but it's still 80 degrees outside, because this book doesn't necessarily give fall autumnal vibes, but it is sort of like one of those weird books. And I think it still could fit. And again, I always want to push my agenda. But it is Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. This is about a woman who wakes up one day and feels a tuft of hair on the back of her neck and literally feels like she's turning into a dog. And she is someone who's an artist, but once she had her child, she sort of has had to put her art to the side. And she's very much struggling with like being her own person while also being a mother, and she starts having more and more of these like symptoms of becoming a literal dog. When seeking a cure at the library, she discovers a mysterious academic tome that becomes her Bible, a field guide to magical women, and meets a group of mommies involved in multi-level marketing scheme who may also be more than what they seem. It talks a lot about art, power, and womanhood wrapped in a satirical fairy tale. This is another one of those books that like by the end of it, the final scene is such like a crescendo. It is slowly building the entire time, and Rachel Yoder just does such a great job of the discussion of, you know, still wanting to pursue your own interests and being your own person when you have a kid. And I think that that concept is something that is very like real for a lot of people. And I just think that she does it in such a fun, original way. And I just will always recommend it. And with that, those are my fall book recommendations. I hope that you like them. I hope you have at least one new book to read. Might be a little bit of an unconventional stack, but that's okay. Let me know down below if you have any other books for the prompts that I proposed, or what book that you are most excited to look into. But if you don't know what else to say, then leave me a fall leaf emoji down below in the comments. And while you're down there, please do subscribe and like the video. I always appreciate your support. And of course, be kind to one another and happy reading. I'll see you soon. Bye.